She threw the wine. The dark purple liquid splashed across his chest, soaking into the white shirt like a gunshot wound. The entire ballroom went silent. Elena smiled, waiting for him to break, waiting for him to scream. But Marcus didn't scream. He just looked at her with a terrifying, quiet pity and whispered, "I hope that made you feel better, Elle, because it cost you everything." The rain over Manhattan wasn't just falling. It was punishing the pavement, a relentless, icy drumming that turned the city lights into smeared neon scars against the glass. Inside the grand ballroom of the Hotel Pierre, however, the storm was merely a backdrop, a silent movie playing behind triple-paned soundproof glass. Inside, the air smelled of old money, white truffles, and the sharp metallic tang of ambition. Elena stood near the towering ice sculpture, her fingers tightening around the stem of her champagne flute until her knuckles turned the color of bone. She smoothed the silk of her crimson dress, a dress that cost 3 months of her former salary, a dress she was currently paying off in installments that kept her awake at 3 a.m. She was here. She had made it. Beside her stood Brad, a VP of acquisitions who laughed too loud and checked his reflection in polished silverware. But he was her ticket. He was the barrier between her and the life she had run away from. Then, she saw him. The room was a kaleidoscope of diamonds and black ties, but her eyes snapped to a shadowy corner near the service entrance with the precision of a hawk spotting a field mouse. Marcus. For a moment, the ambient noise of the string quartet and the chatter of billionaires faded into a dull roar, like blood rushing in her ears. He was standing alone, holding a glass of sparkling water, looking at the floor. He wore a simple black suit, no sheen, no designer cut. He looked smaller than she remembered, or maybe she had just grown larger in her own mind. He looked tired, not the fatigue of a CEO who flew too many miles, but the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who had given up. A hot, acidic wave of nausea and rage boiled up in Elena's throat. It was an instinctive reaction, a defense mechanism. Marcus was the ghost of her past. He was the man she had left 3 years ago in a walk-up apartment that smelled of damp drywall and boiled pasta. He was the man who clipped coupons, the man who told her to be patient, the man who represented everything she was terrified of becoming. Stagnant, invisible, poor. "Excuse me," Elena whispered to Brad, not waiting for a response. She moved through the crowd like a shark cutting through schooling fish. Her heels clicked a frantic, aggressive rhythm on the marble floor. She needed to destroy him. She needed to see him look at her with envy. If he saw her shining, golden, powerful, it would validate every ruthless choice she had made. It would prove that leaving him while he was down wasn't cruelty. It was survival. She stopped 3 feet from him. He didn't look up immediately. He was staring at the bubbles in his water, lost in a thought that looked heavy enough to crush him. "Security must be slipping," Elena said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Or are we letting the help drink with the guests now?" Marcus flinched. It was a subtle movement, a tightening of the jaw, before he slowly raised his eyes. They weren't angry. They were startlingly gentle, framed by dark circles. When he saw her, a flicker of something unreadable passed over his face. Was it shame? Elena decided it was shame. "Elena," he said softly. His voice was a low rumble, familiar and jarring. "You look healthy. That's good. I'm glad." "Healthy?" She let out a laugh that sounded brittle. "I look expensive, Marcus. I look like the life you couldn't give me because you were too busy playing it safe. Too busy being a nobody." She took a step closer, invading his personal space. The scent of her expensive perfume clashed with the clean, soap smell of his skin. She wanted a reaction. She wanted him to yell, to defend himself, to give her a reason to hate him more. But he just stood there, holding his water, looking at her with a maddening, passive acceptance. "I'm here with the VP of acquisitions," she hissed, gesturing vaguely behind her. "We're discussing mergers that are worth more than your entire life's earnings. What are you doing here, Marcus? Snatching crab cakes to take home? Hoping to park some cars out front? It's embarrassing. You're a stain on this room." Marcus sighed, A long, weary exhale. He glanced around, checking to see if anyone was watching, trying to protect her from her own volume. "Elena, please. Not here. You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," she snapped. "I'm reminding you of your place. You were an anchor, Marcus, a dead weight. And look at you 3 years later, and you're still standing in the corner, drinking water, afraid to speak. I did you a favor by leaving. I hope you realize that." "I do," he said quietly. "I realize a lot of things now." The lack of fight in him was infuriating. Felt like punching a pillow. She needed to hurt. She needed to see the damage. Her eyes darted to a waiter passing with a tray of red wine. Without thinking, fueled by the adrenaline of the gala and the toxicity of her own insecurity, she reached out and grabbed a full glass of Shiraz. The crowd nearby had gone silent. The string quartet seemed to falter. All eyes turned toward the woman in the red dress and the man in the cheap suit. "Let me help you look the part, Marcus," she sneered, "since you love being a tragic figure." With a flick of her wrist, she threw the wine. The dark purple liquid splashed across his chest, soaking into the white shirt, dripping down the lapels of his jacket. It looked like a gunshot wound. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Marcus didn't move. He didn't wipe it off. He didn't curse. He just closed his eyes for a second, as if he were counting to 10, and the water glass in his hand trembled ever so slightly. When he opened his eyes, the pity in them was gone, replaced by a profound, crushing sadness. "I hope that made you feel better, Elle," he whispered. "I really do." Elena stood there, chest heaving, waiting for the rush of victory. But it didn't come. Instead, a cold silence descended on the ballroom. The billionaires, the socialites, the sharks, they weren't looking at her with admiration. They were looking at her with distaste. She had broken the first rule of their world. Never let them see you sweat. Suddenly, the crowd parted. It wasn't a gentle shifting. It was a Red Sea separation commanded by authority. Walking down the grand staircase was Julianne Thorne. Elena's breath hitched. Julianne was the host, a tech heiress, a billionaire, a woman who owned half the skyline. She was formidable, dressed in emerald silk, her face a mask of icy composure. She walked straight toward them, her heels striking the floor with the cadence of a judge's gavel. Elena straightened her spine. She assumed Julianne was coming to have security throw Marcus out. She prepared a charming, apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thorne," Elena began, her voice pitching up into a sweet, artificial register. "This man was harassing me. I had to." Julianne walked right past Elena as if she were made of smoke. She stopped in front of Marcus. Her eyes scanned the wine stain on his chest, her expression shifting from ice to concern. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a silk handkerchief, and gently began to dab at the lapel of his suit. "Are you all right?" Julianne asked him. Her voice wasn't imperious. It was tender, intimate. Marcus looked down at her and offered a weak, tired smile. "I'm fine, Jules. It's just wine. It'll wash out." "It's vintage," Julianne said dryly, though her eyes were blazing with suppressed anger as she turned them slowly toward Elena. "And this is my husband's favorite suit." The world stopped. Elena felt the blood drain from her face so fast she nearly fainted. The glass she was holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble. But the sound was distant, muffled by the roaring in her ears. "Husband," Elena whispered, the word tasting like ash. Julianne Thorne stepped forward, placing herself between Marcus and Elena. The height difference wasn't much, but Julianne towered over her in every way that mattered. "Yes, my husband," Julianne said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Marcus helped build the algorithm that secured my company's future 3 years ago. He is the majority shareholder of Thorne Dynamics. He prefers to stay out of the spotlight because he values privacy over posturing. Unlike some." Elena looked at Marcus, the man she had called a nobody, the man she thought was clipping coupons. He wasn't just in the room, he owned the room. He owned the building. "Marcus," she choked out, "but you were broke. We were broke." Marcus finally stepped around his wife. He didn't look triumphant. He looked exhausted. He signaled to the head of security, who was hovering nearby. "Let's take this upstairs," Marcus said softly. "Please, I don't want a scene." "I think the scene has already happened," Julian said coldly. "But fine. The office." The office was a cavern of mahogany and leather, overlooking the weeping city. The sound of the rain was louder here. Elena stood in the center of the room, shivering. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving her with the cold, hard realization of her catastrophe. Marcus stood by the window, staring out at the storm, the wine stain drying into a dark crust on his chest. Julian sat behind the massive desk, her fingers interlaced, watching Elena with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. "I didn't know," Elena stammered, tears finally spilling over. Tears of fear, not remorse. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think you were failing?" Marcus turned around. The lighting in the office cast half his face in shadow, giving him the look of a noir detective at the end of a long, bad case. "Because you wanted to leave, Elena," he said. "And I knew that if you knew I had money, if you knew I was building something, you would have stayed. But you wouldn't have stayed for me. You would have stayed for the comfort." "That's not true," Elena cried, though the lie felt heavy on her tongue. "I loved you. You loved the potential of me," Marcus corrected gently. "And when that potential didn't pay out fast enough, you hated me. I absorbed that hate for years. I let you scream at me about the bills. I let you mock my little projects. I took it because I loved you enough to hope you'd eventually see me, not just what I could buy you." He walked over to the desk and nodded to Julianne. She opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. She slid it across the mahogany surface toward Elena. "What is this?" Elena asked, her hands shaking. "Open it," Marcus said. Elena fumbled with the clasp. Inside were papers, documents, bank transfers. She pulled them out, her eyes scanning the lines of text. St. Mary's Hospital, Oncology Unit, patient, Sarah Vance. Paid in full, paid in full, paid in full. Elena gasped. "My mother, her cancer treatments. But the insurance, the state program. The state program denied her coverage 3 years ago," Marcus said, his voice void of ego. "The week before you left me, I knew you were already drowning in your own credit card debt. If I told you your mother needed $200,000 for treatment, it would have broken you. So I paid it. I sold the early rights to my code. I emptied my savings. I went into debt so you wouldn't have to." Elena flipped the page. Citibank. Personal loan. Elena Vance. Status. Cleared. Chase Bank. Credit line. Elena Vance. Status. Cleared. "I cleared your debts the day after you moved out," Marcus continued. "I didn't want you starting your new life anchored by the mistakes of the old one. I wanted you to be free. I wanted you to be happy." Elena dropped the papers. They scattered across the floor like dead leaves. She fell to her knees, the crushing weight of the truth collapsing her lungs. While she was out chasing status, drinking cocktails with men who didn't know her middle name, Marcus, the man she had mocked, the man she had just humiliated in front of New York's elite, had been silently carrying her entire world on his back. He had saved her mother. He had saved her credit. He had built an empire in the shadows, all while she spat on his name. "Why?" she sobbed, looking up at him. "Why didn't you say anything? Why did you let me treat you like trash?" Marcus walked over to her. He didn't offer a hand to help her up. He simply looked down, his eyes filled with a terrible, final clarity. "Because I needed to know if you could love a man who had nothing to give but himself," Marcus said. "And tonight you gave me the answer." He reached into his jacket pocket, the one soaked in wine, and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. He dropped it onto the pile of medical receipts. "The deed to your childhood home," he said. "The one the bank took in 2018. I bought it back last week. I was going to give it to you tonight. I thought, maybe enough time had passed. Maybe you had changed." He shook his head slowly. You can keep it. I don't want it. I don't want anything that reminds me of you anymore." Marcus turned his back on her. He walked toward the heavy oak door, his arm linking with Julianne's. "Marcus!" Elena screamed, scrambling to her feet, clutching the deed to her chest as if it could save her. "Marcus, please. I'm sorry. I can change. I see it now." He stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. "You see the money, Elena," he said, his voice echoing in the large room. "You still don't see me." The door clicked shut, the sound final, like a coffin lid closing. Elena was left alone in the silent office. The rain hammered against the glass, harder now. A deafening applause for a performance that had ended in tragedy. She looked down at the papers in her hands. Millions of dollars of love, sacrifice, and protection. She had the house. She had the bills paid. She had her freedom. She stumbled out of the office, clutching the heavy envelope against her chest as if it were a shield. The hallway seemed to stretch for miles, the carpet swallowing the sound of her heels, now scuffed and heavy. Every step felt like walking underwater. When the elevator doors dinged open in the lobby, the noise of the party had died down. The guests were leaving. She saw Brad standing near the revolving doors, checking his phone. He looked up as she approached, his face twisting into a sneer of pure annoyance. "Finally," Brad snapped, not noticing the tears streaking her makeup. "Do you have any idea how bad that looked? Julian Thorne is a key investor, and you threw wine on her husband. You're a liability, Elena." Elena stopped. She looked at Brad. His perfectly coiffed hair, his expensive suit, the sheer hollowness behind his eyes. He was exactly who she thought she wanted. He was the prize, and looking at him now, he looked like cheap plastic. "I have the deed," Elena whispered, holding up the envelope. "He gave me the deed to my childhood home, Brad. It's worth everything." Brad glanced at the envelope, his eyebrows raising with sudden interest. "He paid you off? Well, that changes things. Maybe we can salvage this night. Let's go get a drink and—" "No," Elena said, her voice gaining a sudden, sharp clarity. "Excuse me, you're just another version of me," she said, realizing it for the first time. "And I hate myself right now." She pushed past him, pushing through the revolving doors and out into the biting cold of the New York night. She didn't hail a cab. She just walked. She walked until her heels broke. She walked until the red silk dress was soaked through and ruined, clinging to her skin like a second layer of shame. Hours later, she stood in front of the house. It was in Queens, a modest two-story brick building with a porch that needed painting. It was the house she had grown up in, the house she had cried over when the bank took it. The windows were dark. The garden was overgrown. She walked up the steps, her hands trembling so badly she dropped the keys twice before she managed to unlock the front door. The air inside was stale and cold. It smelled of dust and memory. She flipped the switch, but the power wasn't on. The moonlight filtered through the bare windows, illuminating the empty living room. There was no furniture, no warmth, no life. Elena slid down the wall until she hit the floor. She spread the papers out around her on the dusty floorboards. The medical bills, the loan payoffs, the deed. She had everything she had ever screamed at Marcus for not giving her. She was debt-free. She was a homeowner. She had assets. But as the silence of the empty house wrapped around her, louder than the storm outside, the realization shattered her completely. Marcus hadn't just given her money. He had given her a mirror. She picked up the deed, clutching it so tight the paper tore. "I won," she whispered to the darkness, her voice breaking into a sob that echoed through the empty rooms. "I won." She curled into a ball on the hard floor of her million-dollar home, shivering, clutching the receipts of a love she had murdered with her own ambition. She was finally rich. She was finally safe. And as the dawn broke over the city, casting long gray shadows across the floor, Elena Vance realized she was the poorest woman in the world. Sometimes, the people who love us the most are the ones we hurt the loudest. Elena got the house, but she lost the home. If you believe in real stories that expose the truth about human nature, hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you the stories the world is afraid to tell. And I want to know where you are listening from tonight. Drop your city and state in the comments. But here is the real question that will divide us. If you were Marcus, would you have hidden your success for 3 years to test her loyalty? Or was that a form of manipulation? And if you were Elena, would you keep the house or would you give it back to prove you still had a soul? Let the debate begin in the comments below. I'll be reading the best answers in the next video. Good night.